Welcome to the Sharpe Way Show. Yes, Larry Sharpe here again. It's 8 p.m., a little later than normal, but that's okay. I know you waited up for me because you love me. I love you all too. I'm so happy that I have you here today. And look, if you care about this show and what we're doing, then do me a favor. Like, comment, share. It matters. Get out there. Let people know that this is happening. It's important. And of course, head to my Facebook page, The Sharpe Way with Larry Sharpe, and like that page so that people can, go watch it and see what we're doing. I am very lucky today. I have with me the man himself, former Marine, just like me, New Yorker, just like me, ran for governor of New York in 2018, just like me, a second timer to my show. Very happy to have him, Howie Hawkins, the Green Party and Socialist Party nominee. Thank you so much.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm very happy. For those who want more information on Howie, please head over to howiehawkins.us to see his policies, his ideas, and what he's doing. The biggest thing, Howie, if I could bring this up, is, of course, the big thing is Green Party, Green New Deal. You have been for the Green New Deal for a decade, right? You've been for the Green New Deal. Probably ahead of almost everybody else, if not everybody else. The issue that I'm worried about with the Green New Deal, to be forward, the biggest part is the speed. We're talking 10 years to get us off of all, fossil fuels. And the other thing is you want no fracking and no nuclear power. I feel like that's almost like magic. Help me out with this.
Well, technologically, we have studies going back to the late 90s. Ross Gelbspan, who was a Pulitzer Prize journalist, became the editor of the Boston Globe. He convened MIT and Harvard and retired oil executives to do a study. And the technology was there. The speed, what we're talking about is a crash program, an emergency program. The analogy I like to use is the World War II emergency.
Okay.
In that emergency, to arm the Allies against the Axis powers, the federal government took over and planned the production of arms. They took over a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country.
Absolutely.
In order to get it done on a time scale required.
So I see where you're going already. Because part of your plan is to have a lot of government-controlled industry.
Yeah, public ownership and planning, particularly in the energy sector, the transportation sector, and the manufacturing sector. But what we do there is the government would build these new production systems that don't release greenhouse gas emissions, but would lease them to worker cooperatives. So the workers would manage their work and keep the net income of the enterprise for themselves according to their labor contribution. That's different than World War II. The federal government built a lot of factories and then let the big corporations take them for pennies on the dollar. And, this would enable the workers to have a better return on the work they do.
All right. So now we're in this case, we got 10 years. The technology's there. Government's going to central plan this thing out to make it work by, I'm assuming, helping to build the newer factories required, right? And then the workers are going to own the factory like co-ops.
In the manufacturing sector, in the transportation and energy sectors, they'd be utilities, they'd be public enterprises. But the 10-year framework comes from what the carbon budgets of climate science say the rich countries need to do if we're going to avoid a real climate catastrophe.
Okay.
I was the first U.S. candidate to call for a Green New Deal in 2010.
Yep.
Based on those carbon budgets, that year we were saying we got to do this by 2020. Well, here we are. We haven't done anything. 10 years is the fastest we can conceive of doing all of this transformation. Whether or not we could actually do it, that really gets down to the detailed planning. And that's why we want to do a lot of it through the public sector, because if you try to do it with incentives and regulations and tax breaks, the industry, the vested interests are going to resist. If we make them public enterprises, then we can push this plan forward.
So you're saying you don't think that, and I'm assuming you're looking at World War II and like the space race and such, you don't think that we could create an environment to where private industry would rush it?
Not in the core of energy, transportation, and manufacturing. Manufacturing we need because take steel production.
Mm-hmm.
They use coke ovens. You can also do it with electric arc furnaces, where the industry is actually moving that way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you let them go on their own pace, they're going to wear those coke ovens out before they convert to electric arc furnaces. And so you're talking a couple decades. Same thing with utilities, mechanical cervical grids that are used to distributing power from centralized power plants.
Right.
You know, nuclear plants, coal plants, now gas-fired plants. Solar and wind is distributed. So you need a digital smart grid. But the utilities don't want to make that investment, so they wear out the old grid.
So are you saying, I mean, because the other thing that surprised me was no nuclear power. I assumed you'd be pro-nuclear power. So without nuclear power, is the reason for no nuclear power because you don't think we could do a distributed grid with nuclear power? Or is there another reason?
Oh, there are other reasons. It's dirty, it's dangerous, and it's probably the most unsuccessful industrial enterprise post-World War II. It can't function without insurance subsidies. The Price-Anderson Act, private insurance won't insure it because the risks are too high. And even Price-Anderson doesn't cover all the costs. It's limited. And now these nukes are trying to shut down, and they're being kept going by subsidies. Like in New York, Cuomo got $8 billion to keep 4 nukes that Exelon owns open in upstate New York. They wanted to shut them down because they were losing money. In Ohio, they did the same thing. And we just had this $60 million bribe case come forward. The industry bribed these politicians to get those subsidies. So the other thing is, with the investments you would make in new nuclear power plants, you can create a lot more power with solar and wind. We've had attempts at nuclear power in South Carolina and Georgia. Yeah. The Obama administration guaranteed the loans. They've abandoned it in South Carolina, cost overruns and construction delays. In Georgia, they're plowing ahead, but the cost overruns are still running. They were supposed to be open by now, and they're a ways from opening if they do. So it's just not a good industry. If you want to get reliable power quickly with a good return on your investment, solar and wind is the way to go.
Okay. I'm surprised. I mean, I've heard so many good things about Gen 3 and Gen 4 nuclear power plants. Maybe I'm off. Are those the ones being built in Georgia? I don't know if you happen to know that.
No, they're not. But I've been hearing this since I helped form the Anti-Nuclear Clamshell Alliance in the 1970s. And they're telling us about the next generation. The Fermi plant outside of Detroit was one of those next generations. It's been around a while. And that one almost went. We almost lost Detroit. Came very close to a meltdown. So the main thing is cost, and then the waste. You got to keep it contained for hundreds of thousands of years. Why burden, our posterity with that? Okay.
All right. The biggest issue of them all, though, if the government is gonna run this, right? Two questions. The biggest one is, how do we pay for it, right? If we're going to start controlling the industries, where does the money come from to kind of reboot and change, right? To your point, if it was financially easy for the private government, private companies do it, you're saying they would just do it, right? But if they can't, that means it's going to cost the government, I assume, an investment upfront in some way, shape, or form prior to having this.
Yes, it'll be an investment. I just want to add that the spinoff from these core industries and the programs we're going to do is going to create a lot of opportunities for private enterprise. We prefer co-ops, but whatever, like retrofitting buildings with heat pumps instead of gas for heating, cooling, and cooking. And, that's a massive undertaking. I think there are about 100 million structures have to be retrofitted. And that's plenty of job for, small contractors and so forth.
Got it.
Now, in terms of where we get the money, we have 4 sources. Okay. One is more progressive taxation of income and wealth. One is new priorities, less on the military, more protecting the environment and the people.
Sure.
Third is, because we're going to have some of these things being public enterprise, transportation fares, public housing rents, electric power fees, leases of Green New Deal factories to worker cooperatives. The program should pay for itself over time, just like any good business investment. You put money up front, when the revenues start coming in, it covers your costs. But we do need to borrow up front to make this investment now. And it'll cost us less than if we wait. The consequences of not making this transition are catastrophic. I mean, some of the climate scientists say if we go on a business as usual scenario, the capacity of agriculture to produce food will be reduced by 90% by the year 2100, which is a disaster for the human population.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, how do you put a price on that? So
the thing that I heard, I didn't get, but this was different for me. I get the progressive taxation. My assumption is when you say progressive taxation, you mean more tax on the wealthy. That's what most people mean when they say that. Is that what you mean?
Not just the super rich. I know a lot of the, Sanderistas like to say that, but the reality is if you do the numbers, and if you're a socialist, you're going to have a more egalitarian distribution of income.
Okay.
So all of us got to pull some weight.
Okay.
For the public sector. So with the distribution of income we have now, they'll raise taxes on the upper middle class, top 10%, as well as the top 1%. And then we would add not just income, but wealth and estates, make them more progressive. And the corporate tax.
Okay.
So the very rich realize a lot of income.
Right.
It's economic gain, but it's not realized and taxed until they sell.
Got it.
And we would tax capital gains. We tax all income the same. Capital gains, capital income, labor income, just one simplified tax structure that all income would be taxed the same.
So you would actually simplify the tax code, but raise taxes in percentage, but simplify the tax code.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So even everybody. Okay. Got it. So that I get. But you also mentioned something else. You talked about leasing on co-ops. So if I understand what you're saying is the government creates these businesses and then leases the rights to the business or the stock up. How does the government lease the business? How does that work?
Well, they own the Green New Deal factory. Say it's an electric arc furnace, or better, a cement factory that's not Portland cement, where you put calcium carbonate in, the calcium hardens it, but the carbonate evaporates. That's 5% of the world's carbon footprint.
Oh,
so
that's right. I had no idea it was that much.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Okay.
So the factory is built by the government, and then they get bids from worker co-ops to operate it. And if worker co-ops can do it, another private company can do it. But the point is, so the government gets some income for the lease, and then it's the company, whether it's a co-op or a regular company, operates it. And the lease is like, you pay mortgages, you pay utilities, one of your bills.
It's almost like a franchise.
Yeah, franchise. It's
like a government franchise.
We're renting a storefront here for the Green Party. I mean, in a way, we're leasing the storefront. So we operate the storefront, and the sheetrock company that owns the whole building, they get our rent payments.
Got it. Okay. Okay. I see where you're going with that. I got you. Now, you also mentioned, though, utilities. So like a part of when we're paying for electricity, or a part of when we're paying for the bus or the subway, if I'm in New York, right, the subway, a part of that also goes to pay for this.
Yes, it goes to who owns it. And you mentioned central planning. I would talk about multi-level planning.
Okay, so tell me the difference. Go ahead.
Yeah, you would have local planning of the details in each community, each district. And then you coordinate at a regional or state level, and then again at a federal level. So if, like we're going to maybe talk about Medicare for all, and we have a way of doing that democratically. I'm on Medicare right now. I have a bill dispute with Medicare, and I get a telephone tree. There's no live person I can go to. Right, yes. Or if I do go to them, they say, get on the phone, get online, and it doesn't work. If we had, let's just jump into this. We're talking about a national health service, not just national health insurance where the federal government pays for the services, but a public health service where the hospitals and clinics are publicly owned. Healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and so forth are salaried employees, and the whole system is governed by locally elected health boards that federate at the state and national level for overall.
You've talked about this before with me, right? In your world, you're not actually about federal centralized planning, you're really much more about local communities having more control central in that regard. That's really more what you're about.
Right. And when you get to the federal level, what you're doing is coordinating the things that got to be done at that level, but with the ideas for how to do that coming from the bottom up.
Okay.
Rather than hiring a staff that makes decisions for us and we don't even know who they are.
Got it. So you actually want more people voting directly for the people around them to have more control.
Right.
Got it. Okay. So I'm glad you clarified that, because you do call Medicare for all. You actually call it, if I remember right, you call it community driven, community controlled Medicare. So you want it more like the UK's system, more like that style, where the government runs the actual hospitals, runs the actual facilities, and they're all government employees, but the control of what happens is local. Do you mean things like certificate of need and things like that, that locally you would control that? Like the local people decide when a new hospital is built or when a new medical facility is built? Is that what you mean?
Yes. I mean, you would have a budget and the local board that's elected by the people. And actually, you want 2/3 public, 1/3 healthcare workers, because they got the expertise. And, just take my city of Syracuse. On the south side, there are no doctors, no clinics. Half the people don't have cars. It's 2 miles to walk to the community health center where the Medicaid patients go. Right. And it's 2 miles up the hill if you got other insurance to the university where there are hospitals competing with each other. So they all advertise, we got the best MRIs or the latest MRI. We got more MRIs than we know what to do with. But we don't have clinics in the community. With an elected board, this community can speak up for its needs and say, our overall system needs to be efficient. We don't need more MRIs than we really need, but we do need clinics in the neighborhoods and doctors so that people can, more readily get to healthcare.
Got it. Okay. My concern obviously is, does that mean in this world that there won't be private hospitals, or could there still be a private hospital or a private medical facility or something like that? Would there only be one way of getting my health care, or could I go or open up a private hospital?
Well, the market, because this system operates at cost, not for profit, the market would probably only be open to concierge services, people that want a private room and a full-time nurse's aide or whatever it's called, and special services, or they want services that are not covered by the National Health Service, like cosmetic surgery, that kind of thing. So there'd be room for that, but it would be hard for private insurance to compete with a system that offers the services free and is paid for through the tax system. Why would you pay premiums to get the same service you can get for free at the point of service? So that just wouldn't be a good market there.
So I assume, but isn't there a worry at this point that the wealthy get all the cool doctors, right? If concierge services are available, and I'm a young smart doctor, don't I decide to be, I don't know, a LASIK eye surgery guy or a cosmetic dentistry guy? And the best doctors go off and get the big bucks at the concierge rich person hospital or something?
Well, I question whether the best doctors are the ones that are interested in making the most money.
Okay.
As opposed to people that got into the profession because they want to take care of people. And, in the UK, people are, well remunerated as doctors. Mm-hmm. I remember the Michael Moore film, he went over there and he said,
oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Gee, don't you feel poor? What kind of car you got? And they're saying, no, we're, high income. We're doing fine.
Got it. Okay. So let me move to something else medical related. COVID. The COVID response has almost everybody's been unhappy in some way, shape, or form, right? I don't think there's anybody who's like, this was perfect. I mean, almost everybody is talking about it didn't work well. In your world, you would like, and this is kind of what a lot of people are talking about, Medicare paying for a lot of the testing. A lot of people are talking about that. A lot of people are talking about DPA being used to build these things out. A lot of people are talking about that too. But you're talking about giving everybody $2,000 per adult and $500 per kid. So I have 2 kids, and me and my wife, I'm getting $4,000 a month. That sounds amazing to me. Like it. But my concern is twofold. One, again, where's it come from? It's expensive, right, for everyone to get that. I mean, that's billions of dollars. But second, how long does that last? And then, man, if I'm getting that $4,000, I'm going to want to keep getting it, aren't I? Isn't the natural human going to say, Howie, please don't stop. Keep giving it to me.
Well, that's an emergency program while the economy is locked down.
Okay.
And, what we've been saying is the two governing parties are presiding over a failed state. You can see that with this COVID crisis.
Absolutely.
Americans can hardly go anywhere. Other countries don't want us. We're too damn contagious.
Yep.
We have 4% of the world's population and between 25 and 30% of the COVID deaths. What we need to do first is have a federally coordinated, use the Defense Production Act to test people sufficiently, contact trace those who are infected, and isolate those who are infected or had contact with people infected to suppress community spread of the virus. We know this works. They've done it all over Europe, all over the Pacific Rim. And here we are, the laughingstock of the world. People are wondering what the hell happened to the United States.
It's true.
So that's the first thing.
It's true.
And then when you suppress community spread, then you can, with the other public health measures, safely reopen the economy and the schools. And when they're functioning, then these emergency measures, the cash in people's hands so they can survive during the lockdown. Of course, we want a Medicare system that covers everybody. That would continue under what we want to do.
Sure.
But the cash payments, what we really want in the long term to support income is build into the progressive income tax a guaranteed minimum income. The technical term is a negative income tax. So
sure.
If your income is below the poverty line, you turn in your tax form, the government will send you checks to bring you up above the poverty line.
Gotcha.
So it's the most direct way to end poverty. And, most poor people are working hard. They're working people. They're just low waged. So,
yeah, that's a valid point that a lot of people don't get. Most of the poor are working poor. There are some that aren't, but most are actually working poor. I agree. Yeah. So if I can keep going down there, right? So you would say the duration is until the economy is open back up.
Right.
Is there a concern? And I think we're seeing this now with the $600 that the Trump bucks that everyone's getting $600 a week. There are some people who, they don't want to go back to work. They're like, I'm not taking a job. I'm getting $600 a week. I don't want to go back to work. And if they're in a city like New York, then, I mean, they've got 4 or 5 roommates. So they're actually getting $2,400 a week now because of all the roommates they have. They're getting a bunch of money. If I'm getting $4,000 for the average person, say who doesn't live in New York City, but you're giving that person $4,000 a month. I mean, that's $48,000 a year. There's a lot of Americans who they can't make that money without that. So they're going to be like, or my other worry about this is I won't want it to end, or I'll lie, right? It might encourage personal corruption to go, oh, I'm not working when I'm working because I don't want to give up my $48,000 a year. Is there a concern about that amount of money kind of corrupting Americans, if I'm making any sense?
Well, we already had that before the $600 supplement a week. People would be collecting unemployment and working under the table somewhere.
That's true. Yep.
And that's against the law. So we don't encourage that. I haven't seen a comprehensive study, but reporting that even though people will get paid less if they go back to work, when they're called back to work, they go back to work because their health insurance tied to it. That's their job. And in the long run, if they don't go back, they might be unemployed. And in this economy, that's tough. So they say it's a disincentive. It is true. Well, a lot of low-wage workers are doing better on unemployment right now than they were before.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, they want to have a job. So I'm not so worried about that part of it. This is emergency funding till we get the economy going again. And, consumer demand hasn't fallen as much as it would have if we just not provided anything. And, while a lot of small businesses, in a small business, you can't go to Chase Bank and get a loan,
That's right.
You're funded on your credit card, you're borrowing from friends and family. And when you run out of cash, you're out of business.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have gone out of business. But because of these programs, they're probably a lot more in business than would have been. And that's important because small businesses, 45% of the jobs in this country.
Absolutely. So let me go to the next piece. You're also talking about a moratorium on things like evictions and rent payments, utility payments, things like that. I guess my worry is when you start doing that again, at what point? I feel like you make a situation to where if I'm getting my X thousands of dollars and I can't get evicted and they can't shut off my electricity, am I not punishing the landlord? And my biggest worry is not the large landlord, right? The large landlord who has 200 units, 1,000 units, 10,000 units, they're going to be fine. My worry is the person who's got 4 units, 2 units, a renter in their basement, right? That's my worry. That guy or gal, they could be in trouble here. And then lawsuits and then.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. And I had some arguments with some other green candidates who were saying, no, don't worry about any of the landlords. I said, about half the landlords are small.
Yes.
And there are property managers, handymen and women.
Yes.
There are all kinds of people that depend on maintaining rental properties. And if you just cancel the rent without providing for the payment, then you mess up a lot of business and the dominoes fall. Mm-hmm. So I supported a bill that Ilhan Omar put in where you cancel the rent and mortgage, and I would have added utilities, and then have the federal government pay those during the emergency so that the small landlords, the big landlords will get the money too, but these businesses will stay in business. And then when the economy reopens, then we go back to business as usual in terms of tenants and homeowners, paying their rents and mortgages.
But you actually want to go to a point where we actually have universal federal rent control. That seems very radical to me. New York City has some rent control, but rent control from the federal government, universal, seems like a massive task. If I feel like it couldn't work, I feel like they wouldn't know. I feel like it would just crush the rental. I feel like people wouldn't want to be renters. People wouldn't want to be landlords unless they were big. I fear a lot of problems with that. Walk me through that one.
Well, this is something we also did during World War II because so much of the investment and work was going into arms production in the war effort. Housing was not being built. So as it became scarcer, the rents jacked up high and it became a problem. So the rent control we have in New York City is a continuation of the rent control set up federally.
Yep.
And then they let, the states and localities then get off it if they wanted to after the war. And we're in a housing emergency now. We have nearly 1 million people are homeless. And and now we face, some of the estimates are up to 28 million people are going to be facing eviction or foreclosure by September in this circumstance.
Wow.
So rent control is to prevent the rents from going up. And in a lot of cities, we have the gentrification problem, which displaces current residents.
Yep.
And to me, this is a program you put in place to slow down the housing crisis while we build public housing. A big part of our Green New Deal is to build 25 million units of public housing.
Wow.
Over the next decade. Yeah, $2.5 trillion. And we want to do it differently than the old public housing. The old public housing was you put all the poor people of color in the worst part of town, isolated from jobs, grocery stores, transportation, and just warehouse them. And it increased segregation by race and class. We can use a public housing program to desegregate by race and class, like they do in Europe.
How? Tell me that. How do you desegregate?
Anybody can move in. Professionals, working class people, you make nice developments, as well as the poor. We would reserve 40% of the units for low income, because that would cover the about 10 million households or people, forget which, that now cannot find affordable housing. That's more than 30% of their income. That's the federal standard. So now what that does to the private market is once you have that big sector of public housing, and in this country, public housing is less than 1% of the market. In Europe, it's often 20 or 30%. In the city of Vienna, it's over 60%.
Wow.
So the private housing has to compete with the public housing, and that tends to tamp down rents to a reasonable level. So we wouldn't replace all the housing and make it all public, but we'd have a big sector of public housing, and it would be high quality. It'd be a jobs program, it'd be a clean energy program, because we build them to be powered by renewables and be energy efficient. Desegregation program, if you coordinate it with transportation, building the light rail systems that all our cities had between the 1890s and 1930s, then you could coordinate that with building these developments and create walkable communities where you can shop and work and live in the same neighborhood.
Now, when I was running for governor, I was talking about a plan that would allow people who are in government housing to purchase their own apartments, or to purchase their own apartments, to gain ownership in their own apartments. A very cheap loan that if they'd been in the building for a certain number of years, a certain percentage of their rent would have already gone to a down payment, whatever that down payment would have been, and they'd pay a mortgage instead of paying rent up until that point. And the government could keep building public housing, right? And then people could get ownership. Is that part of this plan, or that's not part of this plan? Does the government keep this?
It could be compatible if everybody in a housing development wanted to take ownership and they buy it. That puts more money into housing. You build another public unit. There was actually a program. It was in the Clinton administration to do that. And I was working as a co-op developer at the time, mm-hmm. and I was talking with some of the tenants in this project here in Syracuse that wanted to take advantage of that. But they couldn't get the whole development behind it. So it didn't come through. That would be compatible.
Okay. My concern here when I'm hearing this, that's a lot of housing. 25 million, that's a lot of housing. I'm adding housing, I'm adding Medicare, I'm getting a Green New Deal in 10 years. Howie, you are throwing a long bomb. You are trying to get a touchdown with one throw. This is a lot. Where does two things? Where does the talent come from to even manage this? But more importantly, that talent costs a lot of money. Right? So not only does the physical aspects of it cost a lot of money, so does the labor, and so does the brain power and the talent to put all this together. Wow. I mean, how do we get that money?
You mean the talent?
All of it.
Okay.
We can find the talent. The talent in the world exists. But we're going to have to take people from Singapore and from Austria and from China and
our millennials who are overeducated, working low-wage jobs, trying to pay off student loans.
Sure.
There are a lot of people like that. In private industry, just take this test, trace, and isolate program I was talking about. Mm-hmm. We have people in the military can do that.
Okay.
People at UPS, where I used to work at, can do that. They call themselves a logistics company.
Sure.
The talent is there. And with more progressive taxation, the differentiation between working in the public sector and private sector will be reduced. When we had a top marginal rate of 90, got as high as 94%, I think, during World War II. It was in the 90% under Eisenhower. Businesses didn't pay their executives such high salaries. It just didn't make sense because you're just basically giving it to Uncle Sam. So they would either pay out dividends or reinvest it in the business.
Sure.
And so there was much smaller differential between what a manager in the private sector today gets and what in the public sector compared to the way it was in the 40s, really through the 60s.
All right. So you think we will be able to still draw that talent without having to pay crazy amounts of money?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me go totally to a different world, which I know this is part of your plan, which is, reducing all our military expenditures so that we can pay for a bunch of this also. I love what you call it. You call it peace policies. Love that. You can have it this year, but next year I'm stealing that. So I love peace policies. That is amazing. So one of the things you talk about is the idea of a pledge to not nuke first. That's against our policy, kind of, isn't it? I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is against our policy. It's been discussed as late as the Obama administration. If you read histories like Daniel Ellsberg's Doomsday Machine, which is really his second Pentagon Papers, he goes through the whole history of how this was considered. China and India had it as a policy until this recent nuclear arms race broke out. And they are now thinking, well, maybe not, because they're worried about a first strike. The hypersonic strategic nukes are 6 times faster now than they were.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Wow.
Yeah, so it's not launch on warning, it's launch on anticipation.
Wow.
So, the whole thing is getting really crazy. And then you got the tactical nukes. They're putting more in conventional forces.
Yep.
And the doctrine of both the US and Russia now is they call it escalate to de-escalate. In other words, if you're losing in a conventional fight, you use some tactical nukes, and then you say, let's de-escalate.
Yes.
If you read the history from Ellsberg, basically it's automated. Once some nukes start flying, they're all going to fly, and that's the end of us.
Right.
So the point of the peace initiatives or peace policies is to reduce tensions.
Right. Okay.
The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has their doomsday clock the closest they've ever had it to midnight. The last bilateral treaty between the U.S. and Russia is strategic arms. It expires next February 5th. None of the presidential candidates are even talking about this because both parties are behind this modernization program.
Well, no, actually, one of them was. Tulsi Gabbard was talking about this.
Yeah, but she said it in relation to North Korea nuking Hawaii, where she's from.
Okay.
She was on a bill in Congress for no first use, a pledge of no first use.
Yep.
But it was not on her website during the campaign. Because I looked at that. The one who did was Mike Gravel.
Oh, right. Yes. Right. Yep.
And so, he wanted to pledge no first use. And he wanted the U.S. to get behind the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which 122 nations agreed to the text of 3 years ago, this July. And the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in this country knows that.
Yeah, I didn't know it either.
Political leadership is not talking about it. The rest of the world's scared to death. So I think we want to cut the military budget by 75%, withdraw from these endless wars, start bringing troops home from these 800 foreign military bases.
Yes.
Have a defensive posture instead of a global military empire. No first use. Disarm to a minimum, credible deterrent, and then go to the other nuclear powers and say, we're no longer trying to be a military empire all over the world. We want complete and mutual nuclear disarmament, and go there with world public opinion. These 122 non-nuclear nations that agreed to that treaty on the prohibition.
So hold on, this is radical. I like this part, but this is radical. You're saying bring our military down to a defensible position without worrying about whether we make a treaty with anybody else or not. Just do it. And then say, hey guys, we did it. Why don't you?
Yeah, I would say it'd be an orderly withdrawal.
Okay.
When Trump left Rojava, where the Kurds have the self-administrated zone.
Horrible.
It's because Erdogan said, I want to invade.
I know. Terrible.
That he should not have done.
Correct.
And this is a country that's in NATO. It's supposedly a defensive alliance. And here's a guy invading Turkey. Now he's invaded Iraq to go after the Kurds he doesn't like. And NATO just sits there like it's powerless. It's a real problem. So
tell me what.
So we don't create more problems leaving than we did getting in.
All right. So let me ask you, what does the military in your world? Can you tell me kind of what it looks like? Right? Do we have nukes? Do we have a navy? How big is it? You're just general rule. What does it look like?
Sufficient to defend our home territory and participate in multilateral action through the UN.
Okay.
Or maybe, a coalition if it's really necessary to deal with aggression, genocide, those kinds of things. But really, it has to be real because the U.S. has used those things as excuses.
Absolutely.
They intervene. So I'm not talking about, using that as a cover. I mean, Hitler, when he invaded the Sudetenland, said he was doing it for humanitarian purposes.
He was protecting Germans.
Yeah. So,
right.
That's as old as war. So it's got to be for real. But, we should have a force that can contribute to that. We're part of a peacekeeping force in the Sinai Peninsula that keeps the Israelis and Egyptians. And that's been successful. that, I think is a legitimate deployment.
But don't you get scared of what you just said, right? If we stay in NATO, right? If we stay in the UN, aren't we just asking to be drawn into another Iraq or drawn into Ukraine or, insert thing here or into Rwanda or being drawn into one of these places where we can't get out? I mean, you're a Vietnam War era Marine. We threw ourselves in that supposedly helping the French or whatever was the garbage we told ourselves back in the 50s, right? Shouldn't we be, if you're going to have a military that's defensive, shouldn't we pull out of the UN peacekeeping forces? Should we pull out of NATO?
Well, NATO, it's become a platform for imperialism.
Yes.
It's the physical platform to invade the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. Mm-hmm. So, NATO is not a defensive alliance. The UN is supposedly there to keep the peace. And that's what the peacekeeping forces. And, we should not get drawn into something that is under the guise of something else. Sure. Now, we participated that in Libya. Yep. We said we're just going in to protect the people in not Tripoli, but the other city, Benghazi. Anyway, the city on the eastern side. Mm-hmm. And instead, we bombed the hell out of Libya to overthrow Gaddafi.
Yep.
And it was, and then we just left them. I mean, they're still fighting right now.
Yep, absolutely. And we made things worse.
Yeah, and we pulled back, but the Russians, the Turks, the Saudis, the Egyptians,
the Russians are there now.
Qataris, it's a big proxy war. And the poor Libyans, they've been at war now for a decade. It's a shame. And so that's the case where we went in with a limited purpose that was supposedly humanitarian, but it was cover for, getting rid of Gaddafi. And, that's the kind of thing that we should not be doing.
All right. So what about the biggest thing we hear about all the time? Cyber warfare, right? Is there a place for a cyber attack division corps? Does this have a no cyber attack first pledge? Should it even exist? Should cyber only be for the private sector, right? How do we, I mean, that's a fear that we have, right? They may be even attacking our elections. They could be attacking our grid. I mean, who knows what could be happening here? How do we defend against that, or do we?
Oh, I think we need to really address that. That Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist statement, when they moved their doomsday clock the closest ever in the midnight, they said the new nuclear arms race, inaction on the climate crisis, and then they said disinformation in cyberspace has got everybody so confused they don't trust anything, and publics can't galvanize around a program to get governments to do the right thing. It's a huge problem. Now, going back to the Bush administration, Obama administration, Trump administration, the Russians have offered to negotiate a cyber treaty.
Okay.
And we turned them down. And it would be like an arms treaty. You have mutual inspection and, different protocols. So we can dial this back, because right now it's very confusing to figure out what's going on, because while you got legitimate news organizations, you got others out there spreading rumors. It's like, the worst rumor mill we've ever had. And
my worry,
figure what's going on. So I think the other thing I want to say about that is,
please,
if I was president, I would drop the charges against Edward Snowden.
Yes. And
I would bring him into my administration, because the best book I read last year was, what do you call it? I forget the name right now, but it was about how he made a decision to reveal that the NSA was spying on us all.
Yep.
And interspersed in there are his ideas about how to conduct legitimate intelligence, like the coronavirus.
Sure.
There's a case where the Eisenhower administration found out Taiwan was trying to develop a nuclear weapon, and they told them, you want support from us, stop. And they did. So there's legitimate intelligence gathering. Mass surveillance of us is not legitimate.
That's correct. So, yes.
In one place in the book, Snowden says, the biggest conflict in the world today is between liberal democracy and authoritarianism.
Yeah.
So I like his values, and he's got the expertise. I mean, he's one of these guys that's been on a computer since he could, as soon as he could stand up, I guess.
Absolutely.
So he's got the expertise and the right values. And I would want somebody like that advising me on how to deal with this new cyber world.
Yeah. So now you gave me two separate things. Let me go back to let me go. Now let me stay there. You're a big fan, and me too. I'm totally on board with you here. You're a big fan of having an environment to where whistleblowers are respected, that whistleblowers are heroes, that whistleblowers aren't punished, and that we hear them. An environment to where we can look at the government and say, "Hey, something's wrong." Why are only like guys like us thinking that? Why are the Democrats, Republicans all about putting them in jail? It's crazy.
Because the whistleblowers are blowing the whistle on them. That's, I think, the bottom line with that in that case. So, they need public support.
Yes. The book is called No Place to Hide.
No, it's 2 words.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Permanent record.
Oh, permanent record. Thank you. There we go. Permanent record. There we go. I'm glad.
You
Excellent.
won't be able to put it down once you start reading it. It's very compelling.
There we go, guys. Absolutely. Permanent record. There we go. So, all right. So let me go back to the other part of cyber. I'm worried about cyber for 2 reasons outside of what you just said. One is, do I trust the Russians in that case? Because of the second reason, which is a lot of the attacks that are being done, particularly in cyber, but other places, are not done by officially, state actors. They are, but they're not, right? They're sponsored by somebody who's wealthy or a state, but they're not actually state actors. They are independent. They're the Osama bin Ladens of the world, right? They're not officially state actors. So if, Putin says, yeah, President Hawkins, I'm totally going to sign this contract, and he does, and he agrees to it, and then 3 guys who are hanging out in Mongolia, they make a cyber attack, he goes, well, it wasn't me. That is a concern I have. Like, how do we handle that?
Well, I think part of the cyber treaty should be how we handle that.
Okay.
In other words, identifying who is, doing, hacking into information that is private or, a state secret, and or doing industrial espionage.
Sure.
That even before the cyber world, that was a concern.
Absolutely.
Corporate crime.
Yep.
Which is under enforced.
Yep.
We spend a lot on our street police, and we don't have enough people doing the beat in the suites of corporations. So I think that would have to be part of the cyber treaty so that we can deal with people that are acting outside of states.
So let me now then move back to economy, if I could. Let me head back to the piece you mentioned, which is kind of an economic bill of rights you've spoken about in the past. The job guarantee scares me. I understand the minimum wage. I understand the UBI or the NIT. I get that. I understand that. I don't get the job guarantee. And why would you need one, right? If you've got a UBI or negative income tax, if you have that, why do you require a job guarantee?
Well, I think when people are employed, and this is, partly the American work ethic, but I think it's more than that. People want to feel that they're contributing.
Sure.
That they're relevant, that they're, a positive force in society. So the most frustrating experiences in my life, and this happened more when I was construction, which is kind of a boom and bust industry. Yeah. Is when I want to work and there's no work. And, what do you do about that? You go to the unemployment office and, you're too blue collar to get a white collar job. You're too well paid to get a McDonald's job. And, it's very frustrating. So, and you poll American people, and this goes back to the first attempt to do this after World War II. And then in the 1970s, there was something called the Humphrey-Hawkins bill. Hubert Humphrey, Gus Hawkins in the House. It got gutted. It was passed, but it was gutted. So it didn't really provide a job guarantee. But most people think if you're willing and able to work and there's not a job work for you in the private sector, go to work in the public sector like we did during the Works Progress Administration. Mm-hmm. And you would have locally planned projects, social services, public services, and also public works or infrastructure. And and then you go to work. So instead of going to the unemployment office, you go to the employment office when you can't find a job.
But my worry here is guaranteed job. What if for the specific area you're in, there's not a project, right? There isn't a project for you to work on. Is one, do I make a make work job? And then how much do I get from a make work job, right? The pride that I get in achieving something is building something of value to someone, hopefully myself, but to someone that is value, and I build that value, and I get that I'm productive. But if you're just saying, hey, Larry, you don't got a job, hey, go over there and push those rocks to the left and push those rocks to the right, I'm not really producing anything. I'm just getting paid.
Well, we got plenty of work needs to be done in terms of public services. They talk about defunding the police because the police are out there dealing with social problems they're not equipped to deal with.
Very true.
Like people with mental health issues or the homeless, instead of charging them with vagrancy, how about we build them a home? Those kinds of things. And elderly people, youth recreation programs, summer programs. There's plenty of services we could provide. So I don't think we need to find make work for people. We can find productive things. And what they did during Works Progress Administration was local communities planned most of the projects. There were some large scale federal projects as well, and then the federal government paid 90%, the local government paid 10%. So they would buy in and they wouldn't be doing make work. They'd be doing something to get some value for their share.
Let me go to a spot that I think has actually happened here, right? And that is the rise of the female entrepreneur, which I'm very happy about. I'm happy that there are more female entrepreneurs. In fact, there is a lot of investment bankers now, and people will be horrified to hear this, who will only work with women entrepreneurs now. They literally are sexist against men. That's actually happening now. There are enough people who are saying, if you're not a woman entrepreneur or you don't have a woman on your board, I'm not even working with you. That's actually happening now. The rise of woman entrepreneur. But the rise of woman entrepreneur came, while I'm happy with the outcome, the way it happened was bad, meaning you found women starting their own jobs because of the glass ceiling, right? They literally couldn't get ahead. The environment said, no, I'm not going to promote you. So they said, you know what? I'm going to go do my own thing, compete with you, and I'm going to be better than you. And I think now if you look in the market today, particularly in small businesses, there's a whole lot of very powerful women, and because they actually weren't given the opportunities. In fact, I go one step further, look at women of color. You find a lot of women of color who were just unhappy with the work they could get. And you have a huge explosion of women of color entrepreneurs, tons of them. If we go with that field of if you lose a job, you get a government job, do we, and this is an open question, I don't know if it's true, do we break that entrepreneurial spirit that often comes from someone collapsing and falling down?
Well, I think you'd actually open it up because people who now stick to a job they don't really like, but the healthcare is there. Mm-hmm. Like when I worked at UPS, 90% of the people there, they were part-time jobs. They work you really hard for 4 hours and wear you out.
Yeah, and, sure.
People still had to get second jobs, but they weren't full-time jobs, but you got full-time healthcare and a decent pension. So people stuck with those jobs, and they weren't, not the most fun jobs for most people. But if you have a job to fall back on, and a guaranteed income above poverty, and healthcare, and some other basic economic rights, then you can go out and take the risk. And then if you fail, you got something to fall back on instead of, failing and then, probably owing money and, not having a source of income. I mean, small businesses, sometimes unforeseen circumstances come up. I'm not talking about COVID, but just, you get a successful restaurant going, and then, McDonald's sees that. And so they move across the street.
Yep.
And they already got a, loyal customer base, and they can undercut you on price, even though quality isn't the same. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, your business that was working isn't working anymore. So I think, with that sort of safety net, you can go out. And I think the other thing is people that have innovation ideas, they won't bring the idea to market. Not because they won't make money. They just, innovators, inventors, they just want to see what they're thinking about if they can make it work.
Sure.
And one thing we can do with a public banking sector is, small businesses have, if you're going to do innovation, you got to go to venture capitalists. Sure. And they want their money back in 3 to 5 years. They're out to make money, not advance innovation. But with a public bank, they have a broader purpose. So you maybe get your financing there and take your chance. So I think these public avenues are the avenues of private commerce if we do it right.
Well, you've gone to another spot here, which I'll go there. This is the idea. You have an idea of publicly owned big industry and big banks, right? So does the entrepreneur grow themselves to be purchased by the government? How does that work? And then is there a percentage? Do we nationalize them now? How do I take ownership of Bank of America? How do I take ownership of Ford? Right? How does that happen?
Well, I think it needs to be pragmatic industry by industry. In banking, we got 4 banks that have over half the assets, half the deposits, half the customers. They're too big to jail and they're too big to fail systemically.
Yep, that's true.
We can make them public utilities that serve the whole financial sector on a national scale, like the Bank of North Dakota does in the state of North Dakota. They've had a bank now for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. It's always brought income into the state, and they partner with community banks, credit unions. They have more community banks in North Dakota than practically the rest of the country combined, because they didn't have to, they weren't bought out by the Chases and the City banks. Mm-hmm. And so they do farm loans, business loans, consumer loans, student loans. And so they have a good partnership there. So I think, in the banking sector, that's a way to look at it.
So if I hear you about but a lot of these banks, right? A lot of them, they're international, right? I mean, I'm not sure how a United States government grabs that bank when the bank has its assets all over, right? Other countries, within states. I don't know. I'm confused on how, and then which ones do you pick? Is it just the ones that hit a certain dollar value? And then does that then, if that's my word, right? If I'm a bank or a credit union or whatever, if I know that once I hit that dollar value, government seizes me, do I then just break up and have a bunch of smaller banks? Is that the plan? That the goal is a bunch of smaller banks because if it gets too big, the government seizes it?
I think it depends on the industry and, what makes sense. Different markets have very different characteristics and different ways they're serving the public or not. So I don't have a particular, dollar amount in mind. I think in the market, if they are monopolistic or systemic in the sense that if they fail, the system becomes put in jeopardy, then you got to look at public ownership.
Gotcha.
And I wouldn't seize them. I would, buy them out. So long-term bonds, you pay off the owners over time. You might buy a controlling interest and allow private investors to stay invested.
Okay.
And it just, I think you have to go sector by sector. Like the oil and gas sector, they've been totally irresponsible with respect to the climate and air pollution. I just say we, buy them out and bring them into the planning of the transition away from fossil fuels.
Got it.
If you're planning transportation, I think you want the railroads and the airlines to be part of a public corporation, but maybe not the auto companies. Okay. But if they don't, play ball and transition to zero emission electric vehicles, then maybe you do want to bring them into the public sector too. So I think it's got to be, pragmatic and trying to, know what your objectives are in terms of public policy and then seeing what's going on in that industry.
My other worry here, because I know you like the localized planning piece, but localized planning is not going to match, right, with whatever New York City wants. It's not going to match what Binghamton wants. It's not going to match what the state wants. It's not going to match with what Washington, D.C. wants. So I'm a little concerned on how that actually works. That kind of makes me be concerned.
Well, again, that goes back to multi-level planning. So these big 4 banks that, have over half of the banking sector, they would service the whole financial sector. And then at the local level, you could have a municipal bank next to your community banks, or maybe you don't need that. I think, each community could decide that for itself. Out in California, they're looking at public banking because the federal government we got now threatens to prosecute people dealing with marijuana.
Yep.
So it becomes a cash business, which creates a lot of problems. So they're thinking, well, let's set up public banks that are legitimate here and they can basically launder their money through the public sector and not worry about the feds.
Well, I have another bigger worry though here, and I'm okay if I'm off here. I can't think of a government-run company that's done a good job, right? I feel like so many of them have failed. Amtrak failed, airlines failed. I mean, so many of them have failed. The VA has failed. So many of them have failed. I don't. Why would we assume that it would be any better? And if the public companies, government-run companies, actually did better, would they just become corrupt, just like the private ones? That's my worry is when you start creating the government side, in theory at least, not when they get too big, but in theory, if a private sector business screws up or fails, doesn't it get replaced by the next guy or gal who has the idea, unless they have government behind them, right? That. But if it's a government problem, I feel like even if they screw up, it doesn't really change it. Maybe the guy at the top gets fired, maybe, but that's about it, right?
Well, I would say we have over 2,000 public power utilities in the country. And on average, they provide the power at 15% less than investor-owned utilities.
Okay.
They're locally controlled. So, we have National Grid up here in upstate. We call it National Greed. And
yes.
They're like dealing with Medicare. You get a phone free. They used to have an office when it was Niagara Mohawk, 30 years ago, but now you can't get a live person.
Right.
So I think those are examples. Now, not all of them are good. Some of them are corrupted. We have corrupt politics, and, they can be politically influenced. So democracy is no guarantee, but it gives us a fighting chance. And then you mentioned Amtrak. I think that was set up for failure. It wasn't a priority.
Okay.
The U.S. Postal Service, they want them to pre-fund for 75 years their pensions and health care.
I know, it's crazy.
Which is, we're paying for people that haven't even been born yet. And that was a setup because there are some people in the government want to run it into the ground and let, UPS and FedEx, but then the service won't be as good. Because the one thing the post office does is they cross-subsidize service. So if you're in a rural area, it's more expensive to service you, but those post offices are there. And that was something, they wrote it into the Constitution. It was so important. So, there are some places. I think the VA, same thing, and the British Health Service too. You get the idea that we're paying too much for it. We're going to have an austere government, so you underfund it. That's a political problem. And then sometimes they say we're going to make it more efficient by bringing in market measures. So in healthcare, then you want to run lean, and then when you get a COVID crisis, you don't have the capacity to back it up. And I think, one problem with the VA there too, as well, is it's very centralized administration.
Yep.
On the other hand, I know from reading I've done that VA, once you get into the VA, that's another issue, getting in. But once you're in it, the customer satisfaction in that system is the highest of any public or private health insurance plan.
Well, there was a plan to actually give veterans part ownership in the VA. I feel like that's a plan you'd get behind.
Well, ownership, they already own it. It's public. I think a say in its governance.
Okay.
That I think. And so, then they have some power in looking out for their own interests as customers.
Okay. Howie, I'm keeping you long. Do you have 15 more minutes?
I can do 15 more minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So, because I want to move to your idea of you're a big fan of ranked choice voting. I love that idea. I'm so happy that you're on board with that. And what made you decide to say yes to that? So many politicians don't like ranked choice voting.
Well, that's been something the Green Party's been touting since NATO ran in 2000.
Yep.
And 300,000 Democrats voted for Bush in Florida, and Nader got 97,000 votes. And so the Democrats, instead of asking themselves, why did we lose our people to Bush? They blame the Greens.
Yes.
And we say, well, look, whether or not Nader made the difference, we can solve the spoiler problem. We get rid of the Electoral College and have a ranked choice national popular vote for president.
There we go.
And you would think the Democrats would say, yeah, of course, because the only Republicans were first elected president in this century by losing the popular vote and then getting installed by the Electoral College.
That's correct. Yep.
And instead of embracing this reform, the Democrats pick on the Greens. You know, they're fighting us right now in our ballot access efforts.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we faced it in New York, thanks to
Yes.
Andrew Cuomo.
Absolutely.
You know, he tripled our requirements to stay on the ballot or get on the ballot if we lose it, and doubled the frequency. So, yeah, we've been behind that. We also want to do it for legislative offices by having multi-member seats. In a
What does that mean?
Pardon me?
Tell me what that is. Multi-member seats.
So instead of, one representative from one district, you might have a district of 10 representatives.
Mm-hmm.
And then you rank your ballot 1 through 10 or whatever.
Oh, I see.
And you transfer the votes. It's a little more complicated than in a single seat because you got to transfer surplus votes as well as votes of the last place candidate. But what you get is, if the Greens are a 20% party, we get 20% of the seats.
Sure.
Libertarians are a 20% party, they get 20% of the seats.
Right.
And the Democrats and Republicans are 40% each. So you'd have, well, that comes to more than 100. They're 30%.
That's fine. I get you.
Yeah,
I get you.
yeah.
I get the idea. Yeah, I got it.
And so then you have a multi-party democracy, which I think would be positive because when you have a two-party corporate state and the two parties are divided on the cultural issues, they spend all their time attacking each other instead of solving problems. So campaigns are negative. And then in office, they spend more time attacking each other than trying to figure out how to get something constructive passed.
Absolutely.
Multi-party democracy, you and I are going to agree on civil liberties and staying out of stupid foreign wars and drug policy reform.
Yep.
On economics, I might be more with the progressive Democrats and you might be more with the Republicans as a libertarian. Mm-hmm. So the coalitions shift.
Yep.
So it makes sense to, have good relationships with everybody because you might need them the next issue.
Absolutely. Yes.
And
absolutely.
in an election, you don't want to go negative because you want to be the second choice on the ballots of people that are supporting somebody else. So
absolutely.
So I think it would make a much more positive political climate.
I love the idea 100%. And I like that you said that you were considering, making it to where there's a bunch of people and you vote for top 5 or top 10 or whatever that case may be. You called it multi-seat. Is that what you called it?
Yeah. Multi-seat districts.
Mm-hmm.
So you get proportional representation in the legislative body. Each party is represented in proportion to the number of people that support them. I mean, I've lost district races. I got 48% in a district race here in Syracuse. My supporters got no representation.
Right. Yes. Right. I get it. So you're also, though, about public financing of campaigns. That to me worries me because doesn't that mean it's going to affect ballot access? Because now if I got to pay for 4 people on the ballot, it's more expensive than paying for 2 people on the ballot. Aren't those going to fight each other?
Public campaign finance and ballot access?
Yeah, in other words, if a local county has to pay for the elections, right? Doesn't that mean that the county wants only 2 people on the ballot versus 4 because they're going to save money by paying for only 2 versus 4? Doesn't that?
Well, that's what Cuomo and his cronies said in justifying making ballot access more restrictive because they wanted to go to a public financing system.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's not true. I mean, I actually oppose the public financing they adopted. It's a matching fund system.
Oh, I see.
So, it's a 6-to-1 match. So, a green or libertarian, say we raise $10,000 running for state assembly. We're running against the Democrat or Republican that's got 100,000 that qualifies for matching. So when it's matched, we got 70,000, they got 700,000. The gap between us exploded by 6 times. So it's a phony system and it doesn't exclude private money. So the big interests are still in there giving all they want. Okay. It's a reform that doesn't reform. I like what they call the clean money model. And that is if you opt in, you get an equal grant. Every candidate that qualifies gets an equal grant to run their campaigns. And Maine does this and Arizona do it. And, the Republicans as well as Democrats up in Maine love it. They don't have to be begging for money. They get their grant. They run their campaigns. And, they like it. So that's what I would like to see. And I think, I haven't priced it out recently, but every time I did back when the clean money model was more, it came out of the 90s. It was a reform. And the matching funds is kind of a retreat from that. But it was always like $5 or $10 per taxpayer per year, which is a small price to pay to have elections where money's not buying, the rich folks aren't buying the politicians. Got it.
Well, the last piece I want to bring up, but there's so many things we could talk. We could probably talk for another 2 hours. I know, but I don't want to keep you. You got a campaign to run. We really overlap a lot on criminal and civil justice. A lot. We're about ending mass incarceration. Legalizing marijuana, decriminalizing hard drugs completely, decriminalizing sex work. These are all the things that we agree. Whistleblowers, ending mass surveillance, no-knock warrants, all those things. I guess the only thing that I would ask about is when it comes to letting people out of jail, that's something that you don't talk about as much. Is that a big part of your platform also?
Yeah, we want to release nonviolent drug offenders, expunge their records so they don't face discrimination in housing, employment, education. So they get a fresh start. We also want to provide them support to get back, integrated into society instead of, these guys, they're in there working, making license plates or whatever they have them doing, getting paid, starvation wages. They leave there with little in their pocket. They made a lot of money for the state or some private contractor in there, competing against the labor market outside. That's all wrong. And then, they come out and they got a record and, they got 2 strikes against them trying to do anything. It's, and a lot of times they go back to the streets to hustle whatever they're doing before they got them in jail in the first place.
Yes.
So, it's got to be, yes, release, but also help people integrate into society and, give them the supports they need. And doing that, investing in that is cheaper than incarcerating them. So
do you mean helping people, everyone who gets out of prison? Or do you mean helping people who were nonviolent drug offenders get back out into the real world?
Yeah, people that we can let out and are not a threat to public safety. If somebody has done some violent crimes and maybe he's, got some marbles missing upstairs that, you think they're a danger, then no. I mean, some people need to be separated because they are a danger.
I get that completely. The sad part about our system is our prison system has become our mental hospitals.
Yes.
Right. It's become that. And it's definitely not the right answer. Totally true. All right. Howie, I want to ask, is there something you want to bring up before we wrap this up? Something that you want to bring up that I didn't bring up, didn't discuss, that is important to you want to talk about?
Just one thing. I want to brag about my running mate, Angela Walker.
Oh, yes, that's right. You've co-opted Joe Biden by picking a woman of color already. Yes.
Yeah. She's somebody I've known since 2014. She, ran for sheriff of Milwaukee against David Clark, and people may have seen him on Fox News. He's a black guy, wears a cowboy hat.
Yep.
He loves Trump. Trump wanted to put him in the Department of Homeland Security, but this guy's so sketchy, they didn't want him. His slogan when he was sheriff was, "Don't call 911, get a gun." So Angela, coming off being legislative director of her Amalgamated Transit Workers Union. She's a bus driver in Milwaukee where she grew up. And she got the union involved in the Wisconsin uprising to defend public employee collective bargaining rights against Governor Scott Walker's assault on them. Even though the transit workers were exempt, she got her union involved. And then she got them involved in Occupy that same fall, and Occupy the Hood, trying to get black folks more involved in that movement. And, and she was a community activist going back to high school. She got a Black history class into her high school back in the late 80s, early 90s. So they asked her to run for sheriff. So her program, Let's Fight Crime by Fighting Poverty. And she got 20% of the vote. And that's when I met her. There was a panel on independent politics. I was running for governor that year. She was running for sheriff. And we were on a panel the next year. And I saw that she was someone who is a very clear speaker and speaks with a conviction that people feel.
Nice.
And so
she's from Wisconsin.
Yeah, originally. She's down in South Carolina now.
Okay.
She's driving a dump truck. Well, now she's probably off. She starts at 3:30 or 4 in the morning. And when it's not raining, she's out there 10, 11 hours. It's so we like to say I'm a retired Teamster. We're 2 workers for the White House. We're going to put a better class of people up in there than we have now.
I like that. That's nice. So how can we find out about her? Also, HowieHawkins.us, or does she have a separate site?
No, she's on the website. Her bio is there, and we co-author a lot of statements. What I didn't know is she's a very good writer. She's fast, and she's really high energy. I mean, she comes off that job in that hot South Carolina climate, and then, you know, puts in several good hours of work on the campaign. It's I couldn't be more pleased with my choice. She was the top of my list. You know, campaign.
And she said yes.
She said yes. She took
there we go. Nice.
Family and friends, and she said yes. So
nice.
That was
excellent.
One of the best things happened in the campaign.
Thank you. Well, Howie, as always, thank you for coming again. I appreciate it. Our conversations are always amazing. Fellow Marine, fellow New Yorker, I appreciate that tremendously. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for watching. For more information on Howie, head on over to HowieHawkins.us. Thank you, guys. I will see you all tomorrow.